Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video, we'll be going through my team selection ahead of Game Week 17. Once again, it is a very tight turnaround, so there will be no Game Week preview video this week. However, there will be a Q&A section at the end to address any questions that you guys have over on Twitter. If you are enjoying the content here on this channel, please do remember to like, comment and subscribe. We are striving to get to 10,000 subscribers by the end of the year. It's very optimistic, but I do believe we can do it. Without further ado, let's jump into today's video. So guys, before we jump into today's video, I just want to give a massive shout out to the legends over at OneFootball, who are the official sponsors of the team selection videos here on this channel. If you are new to the channel and you do not know who OneFootball are, where have you been? But they are the best free football app on the market. Whether you want transfer news, injury news, press conference updates, whether you want to find those stats, or the main thing that I use it for is live notifications and the live ticker during the games to find out what is happening in the games and how well my players are performing. And also really useful things such as how many yellow cards the players are on, who's got the most goals and assists, etc. There are so many different features to the app that you could be on there for hours and continue to find different things. So if you would like to help support the channel and also download the best free football app on the market, you can do so by scanning the QR code on the screen or by clicking the link in the description. If you do download OneFootball, of course, let me know what you think of it. So before we jump into today's video, I just wanted to say that I have moved back home for Christmas to spend the Christmas period with the family, which means that I've had to take all of my gear with me because I obviously didn't want to miss a month's worth of videos. So I'm in a completely different setup to usual. I haven't got all the usual gear in the usual places. So hopefully, fingers crossed, the audio, the visuals, the graphics, they all look good still. Let me know down below if anything is an issue and I'll try and fix it for the new video. But hopefully it's all still relatively okay. So this is how I got on for Game Week 16. If you did follow the videos last week and you follow me on social media, you would know that it was going to be a minimum of a -8 and potentially a -12 that I would be taking. The reason for that is I had 3 Spurs players. Obviously, the game was postponed against Brighton, and there was relative confidence, we said at the time, that the Leicester game might then be called off. So he was looking at potentially 1, potentially 2 games without those 3 Tottenham players. Tony also had COVID and it looked like he'd miss at least 2 games. And I had Gelhardt on the bench, who was a non-playing sub. He hasn't featured for 2 or 3 games. So I had quite a few issues in my team. I had 2 free transfers, and I just decided, you know what? I could take -4s 3 games in a row and slowly sort my team out and lose team value because all the players that I want would go up in price, or I just bite the bullet, I take the big hit, sort out my team, accept that I'm going to get a red arrow, but from then on in, I'm really happy with my team. So that's what I decided to do. I did indeed take the -12. And I've sorted out my team now in a place where I'm really happy with it. There are, of course, there's still a few players that I do want. But generally speaking, this is the structure of the team I want. I'm very happy. I did manage to upgrade the bench a little bit as well. So I'm very happy with the -12. And as you can see on your screen, I actually only went from 36k to 50k. Now, that could have been a green arrow. On Sunday morning, after the Saturday games, I was at 40k, so only a 4k red arrow. And I had Bowen and Antonio against Burnley to go. And there weren't many rank threats around me. And I thought, I've only got a small red arrow after taking a -12. I've got Bowen and Antonio to go. This could be a dream game week, getting a green arrow on a -12. Of course, Bowen and Antonio then blanked, and Gallagher continued to get 15 points, which no one saw coming because he's been playing CDM recently anyway. So it could have been better. It could have been worse. I look at some of the hauls in my team, though. And Mbeumo with a 9-pointer. Very lucky because, again, he didn't look fantastic. A 95th minute penalty when he doesn't even usually take penalties. Tony takes them. That's quite lucky. Ramsdale with an 11-pointer. Some of those saves were pretty embarrassing. They were barely saves at all. So, again, quite lucky to get the 11-pointer from Ramsdale. Ronaldo and Salah both getting penalties. Obviously, Salah hurt my rank, but Ronaldo getting a penalty, obviously, I can count myself lucky for that. So, I don't like to say that every time I do well, it's because of luck, but I do like to acknowledge when I'm saying it could have been better if Antonio and Bowen had scored, but I also look at it and think, if Mbeumo didn't get that last-minute penalty, if Ronaldo didn't get a penalty for quite a weak grab on his shirt or a pull down, that could have been a really horrific game week. So to go from 36k to 50k on a -12, I'm absolutely delighted with. Generally speaking, the team, as I said, is really nicely set up. I did bench Jota because I just didn't see a way he would end up starting when he hadn't trained. And I did think that he would probably end up coming on for a cameo, which did happen. I got away with one there as well because he had a huge chance. It was something like a 0.6 or 0.7 XG, or the two of them. He accumulated almost 1 XG in like 30 minutes. I think it was like the 3rd highest XG accumulated over the entire game week. So it just shows that Jota does Jota things. He gets those amazing opportunities with high XG and then he bottles them and he ends up missing. But you want your players to continue to get those chances, and he does end up converting them eventually. So I probably got away with one for benching Jota. But yeah, I'm really happy with the team. Cancelo's obviously going to miss next week due to suspension, which could be an issue. James has got 3 0-pointers in like 4 weeks. I think he's accumulated 1 point in 4 game weeks. So we're looking at him as not an issue, but I would like to start to see something soon, because then they have the Club World Cup in January, I believe. Game week like 24, 25 they miss. So it's a few tricky fixtures. Then they have 2 blanks. And I'm looking at that position. If I downgrade there, I could potentially get in a City midfielder. So I am looking at James, but the stats are still pretty good for Chelsea. The stats are still pretty good for James. And I do think it's maybe a little bit of outcome bias, a little bit of recency bias potentially, by just saying, oh, James hasn't scored 10 points for a few weeks, then I'm going to end up selling him. So I'm still happy keeping him for the next few weeks, but I do have my eye on him because 1 point from 4 game weeks is absolutely terrible. I did captain Ronaldo, as you can see on your screen. He ended up outscoring Salah by 1 point, so I got the extra 2 points there, but because I already own Salah, it ends up that I basically got 1 more point for those that own Salah and Ronaldo as well. But for him to outscore Salah after Salah got the goal, I am very, very happy, and I can call that a success. I won't back against Salah many times this year probably, but this week was one where I thought I could. I think Salah and Ronaldo captainers are both lucky because they were both penalties. Neither of them scored from open play. But that's why you captain players that have penalties, because they sort of have that lower floor. They have that backup that even if they don't perform well, all they need is a penalty. It was the week of the penalties. We're going to discuss that in the final section. Lots and lots of penalties scored. 3 penalties in my team scored, which I'm delighted about, obviously. So that is the team. As I said, down to 50k, but I'm happy with that because the team's really nice set up now. I don't see me needing to take hits for a while unless I want to be a bit more aggressive with my transfers. And that puts me in a really good position going into the Christmas period. As I said, a slightly stronger bench. I did get rid of Gelhardt, who come on and scored within like 30 seconds of coming on. Ridiculous, because he hadn't played in weeks. But it's one of those. I was never going to play Gelhardt. He would have been the 3rd sub anyway. But I did take out Gelhardt. I'm glad I did because I still feel more comfortable now with a slightly stronger bench. And I might even upgrade my bench once again this week, which we'll discuss in my tinkering section. That's the team. 74 points minus 12 for a 62-point net total. Let's move on to the team selection ahead of Game Week 17. So quickly, before we look at my team ahead of Game Week 17, I just wanted to announce the 3rd giveaway for the Mind Game. If you haven't been following the videos this month or you're new to the channel, I'm giving away a copy of my book, The Mind Game, Gaining a Psychological Edge in FPL. I'm giving away a copy of that in pretty much every video over the few weeks leading up to Christmas as a thank you to you guys, and obviously, as you know, an opportunity to promote my book as well. But I wanted an opportunity to give back, and I also love guessing games. I don't know if you guys are the same, but any opportunity to try and guess something specifically related to football, I think is quite enjoyable and fun anyway. So each week there will be a different guessing game around FPL, around football, and anyone that gets that correct will be entered into a draw to then win 1 copy of the Mind Game for each video. So I've already contacted the winner for the first video, and I'm getting that copy sent to him, and I've already contacted the second winner as well for the second video. So this is the 3rd giveaway of December. The challenge this week is to correctly guess how many goals there will be in Game Week 17. So this isn't in my team. This is across all of the fixtures in Game Week 17. How many goals do you think there will be? So do you think there'll be high scoring? Maybe the way to do this, we'll go through and try and accurately predict every single fixture and then just tally up the goals and do it that way. Or you might just say a crazy random number. That's what I've done here. And then as the tiebreaker, in case a few people get it correct, which I don't think will happen probably, but in case a few do, just say who you think the highest scoring team will be. So which team do you think will score the most goals? So an example of how it should look in the comments would be something like 25 goals and then Liverpool. Or you can say, I think there'll be 25 goals this week and Liverpool will be the highest scoring team. Comment down below. If you get it correct and no one else does, you win a copy of the Mind Game. If you get it correct and someone else also does and you've got the same tie-breaking team, after that, then I'll just enter you into a draw, flip a coin, whatever it may be, and I'll decide the winner after that. If you would like to also just purchase a copy of the Mind Game, you know I massively appreciate it. You're supporting me, you're supporting the channel. I do think it's a cracking book as well. If you're interested in the psychology, how to improve your decision making, and also improve the attitude that you take towards the game, and there's a little bit about mental health in there as well, then do feel free to pick up a copy. It is free UK delivery, pretty cheap to deliver internationally as well, and you can also pick up the ebook on Amazon. All of the links are in the description. I appreciate the support, and if you don't want to buy a copy, at least enter the giveaway because you might get a copy for free. Right, let's jump into the team. So at the time of recording, I don't plan on making a transfer unless I'm forced to, but I do have a watch list ready and I've got a few ideas based on different things that could happen. Because at the time of recording this, there is news that there might be a potential postponement of the Manchester United game. Again, I don't want to scaremonger. I said this with the Tottenham game last time, but there is news that there has been a few COVID cases in the Manchester United camp. They didn't arrive at training this morning, although Samuel Luckhurst, if you follow him, he's like a Manchester United journalist. He said that they might just be training later on in the evening, so it might not be anything to worry about. They are the early kickoff in Game Week 17. So hopefully we get news before that. I think the game will go ahead unless there's a significant amount of cases today, but it's one worth monitoring. So if that's the case, because I've got Dalot and Ronaldo, I might have to make a transfer based on that. Otherwise, I think I'm going to try and roll because the bench is... I've still got Mbeumo and Gilmore on the bench for this week. So if Dalot and Ronaldo do miss out, technically I could just play Mbeumo and Gilmore, although I don't think that's the strongest two players to be bringing on in this case. With respect to the defence, I'm still very, very happy with it. Ramsdale has been an absolute monster. Probably the best decision I made on my Game Week 8 wildcard was having Ramsdale on my team. He's been absolutely excellent. 11 points last week. He was the highest scoring player in my team, which was remarkable. Trent, James, very, very happy with. Same with Cancelo as well. A little bit irritating that Cancelo is going to miss the Leeds game. However, as I said on Twitter, if you do follow me over on Twitter, it's FPL__Raptor. Cancelo was always likely to get a rest or two in the Premier League over this busy period. At least we now know when the rest will be. There's nothing worse than thinking you've got Cancelo against Leeds and then him being on the bench. At least we know he's going to miss this game. It's almost better that the rest is false rather than just being a random rest from Pep. So, yes, it's annoying, especially as it's a pretty decent fixture for Cancelo, but I am relatively happy that I at least know when that's coming now and I can just put Livramento straight in for him and I don't get the risk of a one-pointer from Cancelo. So, as I said, Trent, James, then I've got Livramento coming in for Cancelo, which I don't mind at all because the Crystal Palace game is not a brilliant fixture, but Crystal Palace aren't always the most free-flowing team in attack, although they did score, obviously, 3 goals against Everton yesterday. But I'm still relatively happy with playing Livramento there. I'm not expecting a clean sheet, but it's the sort of game that you don't mind him filling in. And then Diogo Dalot, who I've just brought in. I don't mind him against Brentford as long as the Brentford game goes ahead. I have got Mbeumo on the bench who might end up having to come on if there are any issues. But I do still think that's a decent enough fixture. And I don't think Brentford look all that at the moment. They obviously had to rely on that last-minute penalty in that game. And Mbeumo, I don't think will likely score. Tony, obviously they don't have Tony due to the COVID issue. So I don't suspect that Brentford will get that many opportunities in that game. And therefore I'm relatively happy having Dalot in my team. So the back four... absolutely fine. Like I said, I don't have Cancelo because of the suspension, but I'm perfectly happy playing that back four. I could potentially, if I do fancy Brentford to score, I could play Mbeumo ahead of Dalot. But I think if someone was to say, do you think Brentford's scoring is more likely than a Manchester United clean sheet? I'm not sure that it is. And even if Brentford do score, I'm not convinced it will be Bryan Mbeumo because he's just not been that much of a threat from open play. So that is a slightly tricky decision. But for the time being, I do think that I prefer playing Dalot. That's the defence. Let's look at the midfield. In general, I am very, very happy with the midfield. Obviously, Salah and Jota will be staying for the foreseeable future. It was nice to see Jota come on the pitch. I did bench him, so I was hoping he didn't do anything, but it was nice to see him come on, look fairly fit. I do think that means he's not definitely starting the Newcastle game, but as long as he didn't aggravate any injuries in that game, he should really start because the other three obviously started ahead of him. That means that probably either Mane or Firmino will probably sit out unless they play a 4-2-3-1 and have all four of them starting. But I would hope that the fact that he featured, the fact that he looked pretty good should mean that he starts against Newcastle. Potentially a captaincy option if you really, really want to go there. Salah still hasn't been rested in the Premier League. Now, I'm not suggesting that he even will this season, but he does tend to get 2-3 rests across the season. Although with AFCON coming up, I think Klopp's probably likely to just run him into the ground, play him in every possible game, and then in AFCON, then maybe after AFCON he'll deal with it then. But I don't think he'll be rested. But if you do want to go for Jota, I quite like that as a captaincy shout. At the moment, my captaincy's on Salah. Just because I went for Ronaldo last week and he did quite well, I don't plan on regularly backing against Salah. The reasons that we go for Salah is he's consistent, which he showed once again with another goal. Even though it was a penalty, it was another goal. It's a fantastic fixture, Newcastle at home. And I don't fancy anyone else in my team. The only other player that I would be tempted by is Jota. But because of the recent injury, I'm not sure enough that he's going to start to captain him. But it's one for the more maverick managers. The stats look good for Jota, and he could potentially be a great shout. And then the third midfielder, I'm only playing a 4-3-3 this week with Mbeumo and Gilmore on the bench, is Bowen. West Ham were very, very disappointed against Burnley, but Bowen was one of the bright lights. I only watched the highlights, but he definitely looked one of the lively players. If you go onto the OneFootball app as well, you can see that the people that use the OneFootball app can vote for the best player in that game. And Bowen did come out quite highly on that. So my eye test and others' eye test as well. I haven't had a look at the stats yet for that game, but it would suggest that Bowen at least had a pretty decent game. He was quite involved. So I'm not too stressed about having Bowen. Obviously, the Arsenal game isn't great. Arsenal can defend quite well, as we've seen recently, but West Ham are a fantastic attack, and Arsenal do concede chances. It's just that Ramsdale's been in fantastic form. So I'm not stressed owning Bowen for this game. And then after the Arsenal game, that's why I brought in the West Ham duo of Bowen and Antonio. The fixtures after the Arsenal game are just unbelievable, and I'm perfectly happy owning Bowen. The only thing that I don't like about my midfield is that in Mbeumo spot, I'd like Bernardo Silva or Foden in that Burmo spot, but that is quite a lot of money. You can see I've got 1.4 million in the bank. So to get up to Foden, I need like an extra 1.3 million from somewhere. Even to get up to Bernardo Silva, I need an extra million or so. So it's not going to be easy to get up to those two players, but I would like to try and find a way. We'll discuss in the next section how to do that because, as I said, there just aren't many spots in the team that I could downgrade to find that money. But when I'm playing a 4-3-3, I'm perfectly happy. And in future weeks, I can play a 4-3-3 with just Cancelo coming back in for Livramento, and I can bench Mbeumo and Gilmour most weeks. So I'm not too stressed. Pretty happy with the midfield. Let's move on to the forwards. So as part of my -12, I did replace Tony, Kane and Gelhardt with Antonio, King and Ronaldo. So I completely changed my front three. I think that was for my own sanity as much as anything because I was absolutely sick and tired of looking at those front three. Tony and Kane repeatedly disappointing. Then with the COVID postponements, Gelhardt was just a non-playing sub. And whilst he did score, I'm still happy I got rid of him because I wouldn't want to rely on him in weeks where I needed him. Some weeks he might just pop up with a goal like Chelsea after 30 seconds. That is not the sort of week that you expect him to do well. And yes, he might get a few games whilst Bamford's still out, but I just don't fancy relying on him over the long term. And I'm glad that I did upgrade that position and now that I've got a stronger bench as a result of it. I'm really still happy with the front three. A lot of people are asking me about Antonio. We might discuss him in the final section. I'm still happy owning him. The only player other than Antonio that I wouldn't mind having in that position is probably Ollie Watkins. And I might end up going there in a few weeks. I'm going to give Antonio probably, I'd say maybe 3 or 4 weeks, potentially 2 or 3 weeks, if he looks horrendous over the next few. And he hasn't looked great recently. And I did say that the fixtures are brilliant, yes, but his underlying stats haven't been as good as they once were. West Ham are still attacking really well, but Antonio doesn't quite look at it. It's more of one of those, again, sometimes you have to move before you see evidence. If you wait for Antonio to start scoring before you bring him in, you'll miss 2 or 3 price rises. You'll miss those first few goals. And then the fixtures, there's a much shorter run of fixtures that you've got to target there. So sometimes you have to move as the nice fixtures start before the form starts and just hope that they do then start to pick that up a little bit. So I do still have faith in Bowen and Antonio. Bowen in particular still looked great, but Antonio, even in that game against Burnley, he just doesn't quite look at it. So hopefully he'll turn that around. Arsenal is the sort of game where Antonio could get 10, 12, 14 points quite easily. He does like those sort of big games. So I don't mind having Antonio at the moment, but I agree for his price and considering there are other options such as Ollie Watkins, even going all the way down to Dennis, I do think that he needs to start performing sooner rather than later, but I am going to be slightly more patient. That's my style of management. I'll be giving him around 3 or 4 weeks minimum and then maybe looking to move him on after that. King, annoyingly, obviously Dennis ended up scoring and there is a debate on Twitter. Dennis's underlying stats are good but not great, but he passes the eye test. He looks fantastic. King passes the eye test less, but when you look at his underlying statistics, they are absolutely fantastic. They are elite. They are that of a premium striker. So you've got that debate between the two of, do you go for the player that is performing really, really well through the eye test and is actually getting FPL points, or do you go for the player that has the better underlying statistics and maybe isn't passing the eye test and doesn't demonstrate that same ability to pick up the FPL returns? The reason that I went for King and the reason that I went for the player with the better underlying statistics is because underlying statistics are a better indicator of future returns and future performance. A player that has performed really, really well in the past and has got lots of FPL returns in the past, that is no indication of future performance. If you've ever invested money, they always say that past trends in the transfer, in the market are not an indication of what you expect it to happen in the future along those lines. It's the same in FPL. Just because Dennis scored this many goals in the first few games, that does not mean that he's going to score future goals. Underlying statistics, however, give you a general idea of the level that someone is performing at. And if someone is underperforming their expected goals over a long period, you do tend to, and not always, you do tend to see that start to increase their actual returns, and it will start to meet their underlying statistics. So I think there are pros and cons to both. There are pros to just going with the eye test, there are pros to going with underlying statistics, but I don't think you want to over rely on one, and I don't think you want to overuse one. There's a psychological bias known as the law of instrument bias, which is the idea that if you only use one tool and you over rely on that tool, you will miss out key pieces of information elsewhere. This doesn't just apply to FPL, but it does apply to FPL so very well. Even in your everyday life, you don't want to over rely on using one thing to inform your decision making. You don't want to only use your gut feeling. You don't want to only use this website. You don't want to only use this person's piece of advice. You need to use everything within your power. And even within underlying statistics, you don't want to over rely on one underlying statistic. There's a brilliant quote from Maslow in 1966. This is included in my book with the Law of Instruments section. He says, "I suppose it is tempting if the only tool you have is a hammer to treat everything as if it were a nail." It's the idea that if you always use the same thing to inform your decision making. You will treat every situation the same. Sometimes you really do need to look at the eye test, and players like Dennis and Bernardo are probably examples of that, where their underlying statistics don't look that great, but when you watch them, they are picking up decent positions. They look very, very motivated. They look confident. They're taking on shots that they normally wouldn't. These are things that sometimes the stats won't suggest to you. Equally, there are times when you just need to trust the underlying stats. Something like Diogo Jota, he gets in so many good opportunities that I believe that the stats fully justify having him, because if a player continues to get that volume of opportunities, even if it was Nana Raptor, whoever that player is, they will end up scoring goals when they get in that many opportunities. So yes, Jota misses a lot of opportunities, but I don't care, because when I'm seeing the stats that a player is getting that many opportunities, they will end up finishing a few, and Jota does do that. So I guess what I'm saying here is, don't be in the camp where you only use underlying statistics. Don't be in the camp where you only use the eye test. If you want to be a good FPL manager, you need to learn to integrate the two and use both of them. And that is evident with the law of instrument bias. So that's my rant done with that. I'm perfectly happy I went with Josh King, but I'm perfectly happy for those that went with Dennis. Again, if we go back to Nana Raptor, she went for Dennis because she went, well, he's got the most FPL returns. Why wouldn't I want to go for him? And that's absolutely fine. But for me, I think in this scenario, I went for the guy with the better underlying statistics, because in my opinion, and this might not happen, I expect Dennis to slowly drop back to his underlying statistics. I don't think he'll continue to keep overperforming, and I don't expect King to continue underperforming. So I expect at some point them to do that, and I hope it's sooner rather than later, because I brought in King. I do like the double up as well, but I guess what I was trying to get at after that entire rant is that I don't mind having King. I also don't mind those that went for Dennis. I think you probably stick with the one you own. However, the one caveat I have here is that Josh King was pretty much playing left back in game week 16, or his average position was right on top of the left back. So I would worry very much so if he continues to pick up those positions, because in the past, Dennis and King have switched positions quite a few times, but generally speaking, King has been quite central and quite high up the pitch. I hope that that wasn't a permanent tactical decision to drop King back a little bit deeper, and that was just the game state and the way the game flowed, and maybe just for that game, an instruction from Ranieri. So keep an eye on that. If Josh King does start to play deep and left, I would definitely consider going to Dennis, because at that stage, Dennis not only looks good, not only passing eye test, not only has decent underlying statistics, he's now playing in a more advanced central position than King. So keep an eye on that. And then Ronaldo, obviously, delighted that I brought him in. I said before, the main reason for it, not only because I wanted Ronaldo, is just I like the flexibility of having two premiums. Because if something crazy happens and I want Bernardo, Foden and Son in my team, I've got a cash cow Ronaldo. Ronaldo down to Dennis with my 1.4 million in the bank will give me like 8-9 million in the bank to start. So I have a cash cow that I can always downgrade. And I like that. It's much easier to downgrade than it is to upgrade. That's the team. Apologies for the rant about stats and eye test. It's just been on Twitter a lot, and I just don't understand being one or the other. I think in everything in life, you need to be completely open-minded. Being closed-minded, there's lots of psychological biases, such as the Semmelweis reflex. There's lots of things where we're very closed-minded and stubborn and reject information. Take it all in. Be like a sponge. Use everything to your power to make the best, most informed decision. This is the team then. One free transfer, 1.4 million in the bank. As I said, I think I'd like to roll. However, we're now going to take a quick look at my watch list. I'm then going to do a live tinker based on if I do make a transfer, who would it be, and how does my team look ahead of the future game weeks, which sometimes lets you think, where do I need to use the transfer? Oh, this week I've got loads of terrible players. I need to use the transfer there. Or I need to transfer in this position. And then after that, I'm just going to answer a few questions. There weren't that many, but there are a few questions at the end, which I think will make for a nice discussion points. Let's do it. So as you can see, the watch list for this week is a lot smaller than it was last week. The reason for that is I used my -12. I took a -12 and I brought in 5 of the players that were on my watch list. So they have all been removed because they're now in my team. And I also just removed a few other players that I just didn't like the look of, or for other reasons I just don't want in my team anymore. For example, Kyle Walker was removed because he had the red card in the Champions League, and then he was benched for Zinchenko in the Premier League. And I just think that due to that disciplinary issue, and also a few sort of subpar average performances across the season, I do think that he might have potentially fallen out of favour. And I just think I would wait to upgrade to Diaz or just go a little bit cheaper. Generally speaking, though, there aren't many players in the game that I want at the moment. For me, the priority is probably a Manchester City midfielder, and then I do really like the look of Ollie Watkins, but I'm not sure that I could technically bring him in with the current structure unless I took out Antonio or Ronaldo. And then I've just got Broja down on there as the new addition, because I am tempted, if King continues to struggle or if I just need a bit of funds, I could go from Antonio or Dennis to Broja, because whilst Broja's got a slight injury issue himself, there are a lot of injuries in that Southampton front line, and he just looks great whenever he plays. So I do think that he'll play the majority of minutes, and to be honest, at his price, he would be like a second or third bench player alongside like a Gilmore or a Livramento. So I wouldn't need him every week, but I do feel like I could potentially rely on him most weeks, and I think it might be worth the extra bit of money on top of like a Gelhardt or a Gelhardt or a Davis or whoever it is at that price. So that is the current state of the watch list. For me, if I could bring in anyone this week, if I could suggest anyone for you guys to bring in this week, I think it's Foden. I've got a sneaky suspicion he's going to absolutely smash it against Leeds. I'm talking a huge, huge score. It's just a gut feeling, but also the stats are fantastic. And I think the fact that he came off the bench in game week 16 and it's such a tight turnaround to game week 17, I've just got a feeling that there's going to be a lot of rotation in that City team. But the fact that Foden didn't start and a lot of the other key players did, I just think that Foden will start that Leeds game. And it's just the sort of high energy game, a few counter attacks, pressing Leeds as well. I've just got a feeling that Foden's going to smash it. So I don't think I can get in this week, and I'm absolutely gutted. But I do still maintain, for those of you that are wondering, I think Foden is the best City midfield asset. Then I think it's probably Bernardo Silva due to minutes and the fact that he's just playing really, really well. And then probably Ilkay Gundogan. Gundogan's stats are still really decent, but he's obviously got the back injury as well. Keep an eye on that. We'll discuss that in the final section. He's got the back injury. Also, with Kevin De Bruyne back, we don't know how many minutes he'll play, what sort of role he'll play. He does tend to have a lower goal threat with De Bruyne. So for me, it would be Foden because I think he has the best of absolutely everything. And then Bernardo Silva if you just want security of starts. And bringing in a player, as we discussed in the last section, who is absolutely passing the eye test. And his stats are still pretty good as well. So those are the players on my watch list. As I said, Foden, Bernardo and Watkins are probably the top three. But to be honest, I'm going to struggle to get any of those three in with my current structure. Let's take a little bit of a tinker now and look at what moves I could potentially make for the upcoming week. So let's take a look at the team ahead of the upcoming game week. For those of you that are always asking what website I'm using, I do say it in the videos, it's FPL.team. So it's a free to use website. That's the website that I use to plan ahead and look at how my team looks for future weeks. And just have a general look at what sort of plan transfers I want to make. As always, these sections are completely unscripted. I haven't even really looked at my team that much ahead for future weeks. I'm just going to take a look with you, and I'll just show you sort of when I am planning ahead, making these videos, deciding my transfers, what my sort of thought process is behind this. So for this week, like I said, I don't think I need to make the transfer. Obviously, Cancelo is suspended, so ignore that as the first sub. But I've still got Mbeumo and Gilmore. So the only reason I would probably really want to make a transfer is if that Manchester United game is called off because of COVID. But again, I don't think it will be. I think the reason the Spurs game was called off is because it was absolutely rife through their camp. They had to cancel training for they had to close the training ground, for 3 or 4 days. I think that was the main reason. If there's only a couple of cases, I can't imagine that the training ground would close, and as a result, I can't imagine that they would be able to avoid playing the game, especially with the tight turnaround. I think maybe if it was over the next week, cases start to develop. So maybe one to keep an eye on, but I hope it will be fine for game week 17. So this is the way that the team looks. Like I said, Mbeumo and Gilmore on the bench. If the game is called off, we'll just cover that really quickly just in case. I could get away with just benching those two for Gilmore and Livramento. Gilmore and Mbeumo, sorry. The team looks pretty horrific now because I have Livramento and Mbeumo, Gilmore, Bowen and Antonio against Arsenal. The team doesn't look great in that way, but I can get away with still rolling the free transfer. But likely, if that game is called off, what I would likely do is I would probably take out one of Gilmore and Mbeumo for a slightly better player this week, or potentially, I wouldn't want to do this, but if I think that it might be quite long term, I might end up taking Dallo out. I know I've just brought him in, but obviously if the COVID is going to start hitting the camp, then that would be probably quite a sensible decision, and I could look to bring him back in. Although, like I said, I do really want to hold Dallo over the next sort of 5 to 10 game weeks, so it's going to be a tricky one. I'll deal with that as and when it comes, but assuming that everything goes ahead, I could roll the transfer this week. This is what the team will look like ahead of game week 18. So the front line is amazing. Antonio against Norwich is a great fixture. King against Palace is great. Ronaldo against Brighton is great as well. The Brighton and Palace games aren't that fantastic. Even Norwich have been a little bit better recently. But that front three, almost every week, I'm just going to end up playing them because they've all got really good underlying statistics. Antonio's have dropped off slightly, but the teams are attacking fairly well and the fixtures are pretty good as well. So most weeks I'll play that front three. Obviously, Jota and Salah against Tottenham isn't an ideal fixture, but for me, Jota and Salah are just so good, and Liverpool is so good that I'm not really looking at the fixtures too much. So this looks like a dodgy week because I've got Trent, Jota, and Salah against Tottenham. But you need to consider the fact that Tottenham aren't that great, but also more importantly, Liverpool are that great. So I'm not too fussed about that. Obviously, Bayern against Norwich as well is great. James against Wolves is a great fixture from a defensive perspective. Livermore against Brentford is fine. Dallow against Brighton is fine. Ramsdale against Leeds is great. Obviously, I didn't even just clock onto the fact that I've got obviously Cancelo sitting there, so Cancelo would probably come in for. It would probably end up being Dallow. And then I've got Mbeumo on the bench. So I've even got a really decent 2 subs there. So you can see straight away that I don't even need to make a transfer that much next week either. But I might end up doing so because Manchester City have Newcastle. So this might be the week where I say, right, I need to work out how to get in a Manchester City player. Now, the easiest way to do that, and I really don't want to do that, do this, is to take out James for someone like, just as an example, one of the Crystal Palace players like Mark Gehi, I believe it's pronounced. So I could bring him in. He's got Watford, but I wouldn't have to play him. I could potentially play Dallow instead. And then for Mbeumo, well, I'll play the Manchester City midfielder. I could bring in Foden. It means I'm losing James, but the bench is still pretty good with 2 playing defenders in Dallow and Mark Gehi. Gilmour as well. Really strong bench, really strong starting 11. It does mean that I have to start one of the cheaper defenders each week, but I don't mind that because I've got 3 to choose from. And then I've got a really just nice 3-4-3 with Bowen, Jota, Salah, Foden in midfield, which is perfect. Antonio, King and Ronaldo up top. So I am losing Reece James, who only 4 or 5 weeks ago I was telling you was the most essential player in the game. I'm trying to not use outcome bias, but I am looking at Chelsea defence, and the team in general just don't quite look as controlled. I do think it's largely because they're missing midfielders, but with the potential blanks coming, with the definite blanks coming up for the Club World Cup, also with the fact that the fixtures aren't that great anyway, and I just really desperately want Foden for this upcoming period, or at the very least Bernardo Silva. I do look at that James spot and wonder whether I can get away with downgrading. That does make the defence fairly cheap, but I don't necessarily see a massive issue with that. So that is one option to deal with. The other option is just to deal with things as and when they come, because with COVID at the moment, the season could be postponed potentially, but other than that, they're just outbreaks left, right and centre. So I could just keep those free transfers, not plan ahead too much and just deal with that as and when. If I do make that Foden move and take out James, this is the way the team will look for game week 19. And you can see that by bringing in certain players and by taking that -12, what I've done is I've set my team up perfectly for the future. And I don't, unless there is another COVID issue, I won't need to take massive hits again. Front line's perfect. Bowen, Jota, Salah, Foden, absolutely perfect. The back line against, we've got Leeds, Trent against Leeds, Livermore against West Ham, Cancelo against Leicester again, Ramsdale against Norwich. Again, Dallow on the bench, I'd probably bring him for Livermore against Newcastle. The team is really good. I'm really happy with it, but COVID keeps getting in the way. And of course, that is the least of our worries at the moment. The most important thing is to stay safe and stay healthy and get your vaccinations, etc. But obviously, this is an FPL channel, and it is starting to really interrupt the season, and we are struggling. And we're going to discuss it in the next section, how we can get around that and ways to avoid that. But having a strong bench is, of course, vital. And I am very happy with the way my bench looks. I don't see Gilmour as an issue, but I could even upgrade Gilmour with that money instead. Let's just go back. I'll just refresh the page, and I'll just show you potentially what the other option is then. So this is the way the team looks currently. If I don't do the James downgrade to get Foden in, and I just say I won't have a Manchester City midfielder for the foreseeable future, the team would I would end up upgrading Gilmour, because remember I have 1.4 in the bank. I could upgrade Gilmour to something like a Damari Gray, could be a really nice option. In this way, I've got Damari Gray for the really nice run of fixtures that Everton have, but then I've also got a very strong bench because I've got a cheap defender in someone like Livramento and Dallow, and I've then got 2 sort of mid-priced budget enablers in Mbeumo and Gray. I could then even potentially upgrade Mbeumo to like a Gallagher, and then I've just got a really strong bench. That being said, I don't mind having Gilmour as my 3rd sub. The reason is you don't often use all 3 subs. You will some weeks, especially when COVID's an issue, but you don't often use all 3 subs. I'd still have 2 really good 1st and 2nd subs. And even if Gilmour is eventually needed, he's on set pieces for Norwich. He can sometimes play the number 10 role, though he has been playing in that pivot and number 8 role a little bit more often. So he's not a bad 3rd sub to have to rely on 1 in every 5 or 6 games. So I'm not necessarily sure I need to do that Gilmour to Gray move. But the reason is I just really like Everton's fixtures coming up, and Calvert-Lewin's out. And I could potentially just do Mbeumo to Gray instead, but for Burnley, Newcastle, Brighton, Norwich, Villa, Newcastle, they're good fixtures for Everton. And I do want to jump on either Doucouré, Townsend or Gray potentially as a budget midfielder in that price bracket. So I guess those are my two options, but I don't need to plan now with everything up in the air, with the issues with COVID, etc. At the moment, I'm almost certain, unless there are real issues this week, I'm just going to end up rolling my transfer. So this is the way that the team will look. It will obviously be Salah captain. I don't think I need to use a transfer this week, but I will be staying up to date with the latest news. You should do so yourself. The best way to do it is either download an app like OneFootball and keep up to date with the latest news there. Keep an eye on like Sky Sports News, etc., or just be on Twitter. Twitter is an absolute... There are issues with Twitter, of course, with like all social media platforms, but it is brilliant for staying up to date with the latest news, and I also share the latest news on there as well. That's the team. That's a bit of a tinker. I do really want Foden in, but unfortunately, I don't think this is the week to do it. It will probably be next week, although there is still a small possibility that I make those moves this week and just say, do you know what, I'm going to bring in Foden ahead of Leeds. So just to finish up, just a few questions that I was asked over on Twitter. There weren't actually that many, and a lot of them were very, very specific. So these are just some of the more general questions that I think people might be interested in. And then obviously, if you have any dilemmas, do post them down below. With the tight turnaround, I won't be able to answer all of them. I will try and get around to a few of them, although I am quite busy today and tomorrow. So if you see any questions down below that haven't been answered, feel free to answer them, discuss amongst yourselves. It doesn't always need to be me helping, because you guys are all top managers as well. And there are at least, I don't know, a few thousand people that probably watch these videos that are ranked higher than I am. So definitely do help each other down below. Here are some potential questions though. So the first is Bowen or Gallagher. Obviously, this is in response to the fact that Gallagher has scored the brace in game week 16. Otherwise, everyone would have been saying Bowen. The issue with Gallagher is that it's just completely dependent on what position he's playing, and it's completely dependent, therefore, on which players are fitting and around him and which players Vieira wants to play. Whether it's MacArthur, whether it's Schlupp, whether it's Eze, Milivojevic, it really depends who's playing in that midfield and who's available. I do think that Schlupp has been playing relatively well, although it does mean that Gallagher has to drop deep. I also think that Eze will come back in eventually when he's fit, and he could potentially make Gallagher drop a little bit deeper. If Kuyate's playing, that obviously unleashes him a little bit. It completely depends on who is playing in that team. And that is such an issue, because he is one of the best assets in the game, if not the best asset in the game for his price, when he's playing in a more attacking number 8 role. But when he's in a defensive mid role, it's virtually not worth having him. It's pretty much only set pieces and the odd assist that you'll get from him. He's just not getting forward enough. So what I would say is that Vieira is a very, very tactically astute manager. Considering he's fairly new to management, he appears to be making some fantastic decisions. And when I look at when we see what we see, and when we see how dangerous Gallagher is, I can't think that he's going to see what happened in game week 16 and think, great, I'm now going to drop Gallagher back to central defensive midfield. I just can't see it happening. So I think after game week 16, even with players like Eze coming back, I do think that Gallagher will play a more advanced role, and I don't think he'll be relied on too often for defensive midfield. But we just don't know that. The other issue with Gallagher is he's on 4 yellow cards. So I think there's 2-3 game weeks left now before the cutoff for the next set of yellow cards. So if Gallagher gets booked in the next game, he's going to miss a game. I don't know if that's going to put you off bringing him in. There are lots of players that have been on a yellow card for a while now. Callum Wilson's one that they can just tick over and just not get that 5th yellow card. So I wouldn't let it put you off too much, but that is another thing to consider. All things together, if I was making the decision this week, I would still bring in Bowen. The underlying stats are still pretty good for Bowen, although Gallagher's are better, but that was skewed by that fantastic first few weeks that Gallagher had. Bowen's stats are still pretty good. Gallagher's are slightly better, but Bowen's fixtures are much better. And Bowen has the potential to play up top when Antonio's not playing, and I just prefer the West Ham attack to the Palace attack. I do think it's close, and I don't think there is an issue for going one over the other, but for me, it would still just about be Bowen, just due to the fact that we don't know what's going to happen with Gallagher's positioning, the fact that he's on 4 yellow cards, and also the fact that I'm just not sure that I completely trust Crystal Palace as well. However, they have looked pretty decent recently. Question 2 is, do we prioritise penalty takers once again after the abundance of penalties in game week 16? I would say with relative confidence, no. I think that was variance. I don't think you're going to see that many penalties. There have not been any changes to the rules. There have not been any changes in what the referees have been told to give penalties for or against. It's just one of those weeks where, because penalties are completely random, it's like flipping a coin. Eventually, at some point, you will flip a coin and you'll get like 10 heads in a row and then 10 tails in a row. It will just happen due to variance, due to luck. So I wouldn't stress too much about penalty takers. What I would say is it is a reason to potentially, if you're choosing between 2 players, favouring the penalty taker might be a nice reason to pick them. Similarly with captaincy, that's why captaining Salah, captaining Ronaldo is such a good thing to do above someone like, I don't know, like an Antonio who's not on penalties, is the fact that you've got that backup for penalties. So no, I wouldn't prioritise penalty takers, but if you've got a 50-50 decision, it might make you want to lean towards them. But I don't think there's been any recent change. I think it's just complete variance to the fact that there were that many penalties in game week 16. Question 3 is hold or sell Gundogan. You might have, I don't know whether the press conference is today or tomorrow for Pep, actually. You might know already his injury status. I would say, unless he's confirmed fit, I would sell him. As I said, I think Foden is the best asset to own. If you want to go for a mixture of nailedness, stats, eye test, a bit of everything, I like Foden. If you just want to go for nailedness and a bit of eye test and also relatively good underlying statistics, I do like Bernardo Silva. And I just think that Gundogan's stats will probably drop off with KDB in the team. With this ongoing back injury, I'm not sure how much I would trust holding him long term. So I think now might be a nice time to potentially jump off of him. But definitely wait for the press conference. Because if Pep goes, oh, he's absolutely fine, he's been and seen the physiotherapist, he's available for game week 17. He might not play, but then I might think that's a bit of a sideways waste of a transfer because he is still performing relatively well. So keep an eye on it. But that back injury would worry me because Pep did say that it's made him perform slightly worse over the last 2 fixtures. So it's worth keeping an eye on. For me, unless he's confirmed fit, I would end up selling Gundogan probably. Question 4, is it time to downgrade the defence? Is big at the back dead? As you can see by my tinkering, I think it might be time to downgrade the defence. It's not necessarily because I think big at the back is dead, because as you saw in my game week 16, I had Ramsdale 11, Trent 9 points, a Cancelo 7 points, a Dalot 5 points. So you're still getting a lot of clean sheets and a lot of points from your defenders. I think it's more so that there are a lot of attackers now coming into the picture that we want. Early on in the season, it wasn't just because the defenders were performing well. It was also because the attackers were performing poorly. But with the likes of, we want Antonio and Bowen for the nice fixtures, with Dennis and King and Ronaldo. If Kane and Son, if the COVID does clear up, you might want to jump back on Son because he was looking really good. Bernardo Silva, Jota, Foden, Gundogan. Of course, you're going to want Salah as well. Is De Bruyne going to become an option? You've got Bruno and Mane as well. There are so many options up front that we almost want to then pull some of our money out of the defence to put it back into the attack. So I don't think big at the back is dead, but I think big at the attack might be coming into play a little bit. And I think we're going to want some of that money into our attack. The issue is, which of these players do you downgrade? You're not going to want to sell Trent. Don't sell Cancelo, even though he's suspended. Then it's probably James or Alonso. But they are still fantastic assets, and Chelsea will keep clean sheets. And the fixtures, similarly to Liverpool, I wouldn't say they're irrelevant with Chelsea, but it's not necessarily worth selling a player just because the fixtures toughen up, because they could still do. James has shown that on various occasions that he can haul against those trickier fixtures against slightly better teams. So it's a really tricky question. Like I said, I don't think it's dead, but I wouldn't necessarily hold it against someone, as I'm tempted to take one of your premium defenders out and to use that money in the attack. The issue is, which defender do you do that with? Because they're all fantastic, and we brought them in for a reason. Finally, was the discussion topic around, obviously, all of the COVID issues. Of course, I've just got to record and upload whenever I can, and it might be that news comes out after I've recorded, but there are 2 things that you can do. The number 1 is don't make early transfers. That's an obvious. Yes, you might end up being priced out. Yes, it's nice to catch those early price rises. And yes, you might get away with it 10 times in a row. That does not mean that it was the correct decision. I think at the moment, it is a very silly thing to do to make early transfers. That's just my opinion on it. Again, different managers will do different things. I just think that you don't know what's going to happen. You might now see news that Liverpool have had a COVID outbreak and you've got triple Liverpool. You just don't know what's going to happen with all the COVID issues at the moment. Equally, with all the tight turnarounds, there might be potential injuries as well that just pop up in the press conferences that we had no idea about. So hold those transfers as late as possible. And the second thing to do is just have a strong bench. That doesn't mean you need like you don't mean like a 15, 20 million pound bench potentially across those 3 outfield players. But it does mean have 2 playing subs that you're happy to play. For me at the moment, I've got Livramento and then one of like Dalot or Mbeumo or King. Obviously this week I've only got Livramento and I've got Gilmore and Mbeumo, apologies. Mbeumo and Gilmore. I've only got those 2 because Cancelo is suspended. But most weeks, I will have Dalot and Livramento, or Dalot and Mbeumo, or Mbeumo and Gilmore. I've got 2 strong subs, and then I've got Gilmore third sub. So for me, I suppose this is another debate in and of itself. I don't think you need 3 fantastic playing substitutes, but I do think you need 3 playing subs. So what I would suggest is having 2 strong-ish, either like a Livramento and Mbeumo, and then someone like a Gilmore third sub. That's my personal opinion. I don't think you need to go overboard with it, but those are the only 2 things we can do. The rest is completely out of our control. We've discussed it so many times on this channel, the illusion of control. We feel like we have control over external events that we don't. We do not have control over the COVID situation. What we do have control over is having a strong bench and also waiting to make our transfers. I suppose the third and final thing is don't triple up from now on. It doesn't mean you need to sell your triple up, but for me, I probably wouldn't bring in a third Manchester United player, and I probably wouldn't bring in a third West Ham player, because I've already got double ups on those 2 teams. And if the Manchester United game is cancelled, a double up's fine, a triple up would ruin me. Same as what happened with the Spurs thing. So I've learned from my mistake that I probably wouldn't triple up on any other teams other than my current Liverpool triple up. So those are 3 things to do. Other than that, wait for the news. Fingers crossed. Stay safe yourselves, of course. But unfortunately, there's not a lot we can do. These things are largely out of our control. So guys, there you have it. That is my Game Week 17 team selection video with a little mini Q&A at the end as well. Apologies that I can't get all the videos out. Obviously, with the ridiculously tight turnaround, we've literally got like 1 day in between some of these game weeks. So I just get out what I can. Team selection video will be out every single week unless there is a major issue. And around that, I'll just try and answer your questions wherever I can. I hope you guys are smashing it at the moment. I hope you are seeing green arrows. If not, do stick with it. You can potentially go. I saw someone went from about 210k to 40k by scoring 100 points this game week. Yes, you need a couple of good game weeks to do so, but we're still so tightly packed at the top. So don't panic. Continue to make logical decisions. Continue to make sound decisions, and you will eventually rise up the ranks. If you are enjoying the content here on this channel, please do remember to like, comment, and subscribe. As I said, we are pushing for 10,000 subscribers. So if you are still watching this and you haven't subscribed, please do subscribe. And if you're already subscribed, but you know people out there that haven't found my channel yet and you don't mind sharing my channel with them, that would be great as well. As I said, there are 2 other things you can do. You can download OneFootball as well, which is completely free to do. You can click the link in the description, or you can scan the QR code at the start. Do that rather than just going to the App Store, because then you're also helping me as well as getting the brilliant free app. And outside of that, you can also purchase a copy of my book. Links will be in the description if you do want to buy yourself a cheeky Christmas present, or you want to buy a Christmas present for someone else. Thank you so much for watching. I really, really do hope you get a green arrow ahead of or after Game Week 17. I'll catch you next time. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.